Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Kansas and Wichita government and public affairs. Broadcast on Great Plains Television Sunday mornings at 8 to 8:30, repeated again at 4, and at 4:30 we'll show you the last week's episode as well. That's Great Plains Television, channel 26.1. Also on my site, that's the Voice for Liberty at wichitaliberty.org. You'll find this episode, all the old episodes of Wichita Liberty TV, show notes for episodes, and all the other content that I and others produce on nearly a daily basis. So this week, we're continuing on with our look at candidates for Kansas governor, and our guest this week is Rick Kloos, who is an independent candidate for governor. We had Greg Orman a couple weeks ago, also an independent candidate for governor, and here we have Rick Kloos. So Carl Peter John, welcome, our co-host, and Rick Kloos, welcome to Wichita Liberty TV.
Well, thank you. Good to be here today.
So I wanted to mention that calendar-wise, the last day to register to vote is October 16th. I think I've been saying October 17th, so I apologize for that. It's the 16th, and then the election, of course, is November 6th. So, Rick Kloos, tell us a bit about yourself and why Kansans should consider voting for you to be our next governor.
Yeah, well, I tell everyone that I'm the city boy that came to Kansas in the 6th grade from Allentown, Pennsylvania. Grew up in Miltonville area, Clay Center, Concordia, and my first class was Future Farmers of America, and they taught me how to castrate a hog. So that was has ever been embedded on my heart, you know, as a young boy now, and now 52 years old. But grew up in rural Kansas for the most part. Spent the last 20 years now in Topeka, and just kind of as a backdrop of where I've been and what I've done over the years. I do have bachelor's in ministerial and theology, and have a clergy background. But I've also been a volunteer police chaplain, and I was a full-time hospice chaplain, bivocational, if you understand that term. And did a lot with real estate for 25 years, from working with being licensed with agents, and a lot of buying homes and flipping homes over the years. And so that's kind of the backdrop of where I've been. And most recently founded a nonprofit in Topeka called God's Storehouse, and it's really community action based, like a glorified Goodwill, but we network with a lot of different agencies. We have over 40 employees now, and it's just been a real staple in the community, and I learned a lot there. So,
where's that located?
In Topeka.
At where?
21st and Wanamaker.
Okay, all right. So there we go. So, Rick, you are an independent, meaning not a member of either the Republican or Democratic or Libertarian Party, because last week our guest was Libertarian nominee Jeff Caldwell. Why did you decide to file as an independent rather than seek the nomination of a party?
Yeah, well, you know, for me, this I like what my son says. He says, "Dad, we could do politics better," and I've just always been one to launch out and you know, learn as much as I can and try to do things in the right way. And so, you know, looking at doing politics better, running as an independent, I tell people I'm the pro-life, frustrated Republican that went independent, so I can truly do politics better and be about the people. So that's kind of the base of that, and it's had its challenges, but yet I also see a great pathway to victory.
So you filed by petition like Greg Orman did. You had to get about 5,000 valid signatures, and you filed actually quite a while ago. I know Greg Orman waited until the deadline day to turn in his signatures, but it was in February or something, was it? Or
it was over a year and a half ago. We started, and we actually went through about 18 different counties, and I tell everybody that was our political boot camp. I've never been, you know, involved in politics. Just like I said, I've been frustrated where we've been at, and the stalemate. Used to be a time in Kansas we'd agree to disagree, still get along. We'd treat one another with respect and dignity, and no matter what party we belong to. And so did a lot of fairs to meet people. We came up with a strategy, and then actually last year at the Hutchinson Fair, we just spent 10 days there talking to people again, but got over 3,000 signatures there, and it was neat because you got everybody coming from all the different counties. So.
Yeah, although I seem to remember gathering signatures there one year, and I don't think we had anybody from Johnson County, but lots of people from western Kansas, which The dividing line, of course, is Wanamaker Road in Topeka between western and eastern Kansas.
Which side of Wanamaker are you on?
Yeah, is your store a western Kansas or eastern Kansas store? Anyway, and I noticed that there was a debate at the state fair, but neither you nor Jeff Caldwell were invited.
Yeah, and that was unfortunate. I mean, we have been in a lot of forums, and I did a 52-day tour of all 105 counties, and that's really what I built my platform and policy from here, what Kansans had to say. And so I feel like I went through the process of what the state requires, turn in all those signatures. I have a base in Topeka, running as an independent, has challenges financially. So because we didn't have $50,000 in the campaign fund directly, and we weren't quite polling, which we've just been doing a lot of grassroots. My strategy has been a lot different because honestly, a lot of people don't take a independent serious until one, they get on the ballot, but two, really after the primaries. And when you're weeding through 30-some people, it's been a little challenge getting some PR, but our grassroots has been very strong and effective. So,
okay, let's take our first commercial break for today. We'll be back in just a moment. Well, welcome back again to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. Our guest this week are Rick Kloos, independent candidate for Kansas governor, Karl Peterjohn, our co-host. So I think he had a question.
Yes, I do, and I'm guarantee you I'm not a candidate for anything, Bob. You mentioned that you are frustrated. You're a pro-life candidate. What are the other top issues you see, and why did you walk away from the Republican Party if that's indeed the case?
Yeah, well, the frustration is just seeing, and it's not just in Kansas, it's nationally. We can be doing politics a lot better, just treating one another with respect and dignity. And education has been very important to me. And, there's a thinking from on top about how much we spend on education, 50% of the annual budget for the state. And I look at it from this perspective. I say, hey, it can't be something that we look at as a liability only, even though it's one of our greatest liability. But education, I never look at my kids as a liability or my grandkids. They're an asset. They're an investment. And when we talk about the future of Kansas, we need to look at education and our educators as such.
Well, if you think the state should be spending more for K-12, and that's kind of what I'm hearing, and correct me if I heard you wrong, how much should we be spending, and should the courts be determining what that amount is?
Yeah, I'm not so sure I'm saying that we should spend more as much as we should look at what we're spending now, where we're at, and putting a value on it. Look, when I traveled on our tour, 52 days, all 105 counties, I met with over 20 superintendents. I sat down and I wanted to hear from their perspective. Teachers said they didn't feel value respected. Their salaries plateaued too quickly. It wasn't competitive. We're losing them to Oklahoma, Nebraska, Missouri. And so, I think we're going to have to take a hard look at that. I think the steps that we've taken, look, it's been 5 governors that we've been going back and forth and being in the courts, and I just think we need some leadership. If we look at education as an asset and an investment, I don't think we'll be fighting as hard as we are.
Well, if you're a candidate for the school superintendent's support, they've been behind the litigation in front of the Kansas Supreme Court from Montoy to the current cases. Should we be setting the state's school spending policy by judicial edict, or are you comfortable with that, or should we? And if we're not spending enough, how should we be spending it better, maybe, and what level do we need to be at?
I think if we would have led in, as a governor, led in the legislation, and when you value education, it's not just about, again, being a liability, but it's an asset and an investment in our future. I think we could do a lot better. We wouldn't have to be in the courts right now if we would have just dealt dealt with this. If somebody would have took charge and said, okay, what do we need to do? How are we going to fund? And, I think Governor Collier's taken some great steps in bringing funding now. 40 million, 600 million, somewhere in there. So I like the new project that Dr. Randy Watson launched on education redesign, where it's focusing on the student rather than the system. So I think overall we've got a good bang for our buck. But we still need to see how we're going to get that money down to our teachers, take care of our teachers. I'm not for necessarily having a constitutional amendment right now. I think what we need to do is just do our job and let the legislation lead in that.
Well, let me ask a follow-up, and that if the government, whether it's the courts or the legislature, say we need to spend more, you're going to have to come up with a revenue source to do so. If that's the direction and you want to invest in that regard, where would the money come from?
Yeah, well, and that's a valid question. And when we look at Kansas as a whole, some of the stats that I've read is that we're like half the national average in growth since the year 2000. And so when you look at our state, a lot of the growth that we see in some of the urban areas is transfer growth. Look at rural Kansas. I mean, I've been there. I've traveled to rural Kansas, and it's dying out. So I'm not for raising taxes if we don't have to in any way, shape, or form. But at the same time, we need to have a governor who's going to promote. What you promote is what's going to grow, and Kansas needs to be promoted again. There's so many different avenues that we can promote and generate more tax dollars, and growth is the number one thing that we need to work on. So
you mentioned Randy Watson, who is the Kansas Commissioner of Education.
Yes.
Kansas Can, I believe, is the name of the reform effort. But reading on your website, it didn't sense to me like you were in favor of any school choice programs, such as expanding the ability to have charter schools in Kansas, which really don't exist in any meaningful way, or the tax credit scholarship programs for private schools. What's your position on those issues?
Yeah, and I have homeschooled, I've private schooled, and my boys graduated from public school, and I see the pros and cons. I think it needs to be a parent's choice regarding that. But, I believe as a whole, the tax dollars that go towards education is for public education, and I had to sacrifice to have my kids at home. I wasn't looking for a voucher. I wasn't looking for state funding to send my kids to a private school. We sacrificed to do that, and it worked in the season that we did it. But then my boys went to public school, and like I said, they've done very well there. And by and large, again, I just have always looked at education on whatever level as an asset, an investment, in their lives. So I just think sometimes until we settle that, will there ever be enough money, to some, or will there not, or are we spending too much? It's just, to me, it's been an albatross on the whole system for quite a long time.
Well, we've come to halftime today, so let's take you out another commercial break, and we'll be back in just a moment. Well, welcome back again to Wichita Liberty TV. Bob Weeks, your host, with Carl Peter John, co-host, and our guest today, independent candidate for governor, Rick Kloos. So, Pastor Kloos, I should say, and I believe you also have a background from your website in substance abuse counseling, things like that. So, you may have a more informed position on the legalization or not of marijuana, both for medical purposes and recreational purposes, than the average Kansan does.
Yeah, well, I was a hospice chaplain for quite a few years and the life care. And so when you're dealing with that, especially with the opioid crisis that we've seen in recent years among our young people, in the life care, it's a reality. Opioids will make an individual comfortable, and so that they can die, in that experience comfortably. And but it shuts the body down pretty quick. And so when it comes to marijuana, cannabis, however you prefer, I think in end-of-life care, that is a valid option that I would like to see implemented immediately. It would be something that I would sign and be willing to in end-of-life care when someone is placed on hospice, because a lot of these kids are stealing these opioids. They're getting channeled out. They're being taken, and it's a crisis. And I just feel, too, that if we can prolong someone's life maybe a little bit longer, make them more comfortable without having to be out of it, because you see once they get on opioids, they kind of start losing their reasoning and their faculties. And so it's just something that, being the fact that I've been a chaplain in that area, I think it's something we need to do.
Can Kansas learn from Colorado in terms of our drug laws?
I think just some of the studies and the things that I've been reading, you mean as far as being able to...
Just legalization of marijuana in general as opposed to medical, because when you mention opioids, I mean, we've had doctors being able to prescribe whether it's morphine for pain or even cocaine are very restricted, but they are certainly legal for physicians to use, and allowing medical marijuana, that's one issue, but the broader issue has been general legalization.
Yeah, and I'm not really for that. I'm still, contemplating it in medicinal, and then there's other ways to extract it and use it. So that's an area that we're still looking research-wise. I am for decriminalizing some of the petty things. We got a lot of people, incarcerated over petty things, as far as marijuana. So looking at a decriminalization, but I'm not sure that what I've been reading, what I've been seeing through Colorado and the stats, that there is quite the revenue and that it's being effective. Matter of fact, one article I was reading was talking about how there are more young people now that are on marijuana than ever before in their school systems. So.
And I guess related to that in just an oblique way is I think you've promoted the ability for farmers to grow industrial.
Yes.
And that will tell us about that, because I'm not really all that familiar with that.
Yeah, well, it's in my understanding, it can be put into 25,000 different products as well, so it would help the state as a whole when we're talking about the different products. And then farmers, especially out in western Kansas, I had the opportunity to go to the Ogallala Summit out there, and just an incredible 8 states met and talking about the water crisis, and boy, there were so many things I learned there, how creative, innovative, and I was intrigued with just what they're doing in technology and that, but maybe a later question. Just talking about the industrial hemp, and I know there's some measures being taken now for possibly in the springtime, some experiments along this area, but anything we can do to help our farmers and our economy as far as industrial hemp, because everything I've seen and been hearing and reading, I think it's a positive step.
Let me ask you, in terms of, as one of 5 ballot qualified candidates for governor, are there any issues that you're emphasizing that separate you from the other 4 candidates? I mean, where you have a position that no one else is taking, or that you're pretty much unique in that regard? Yeah,
well, one, just like I said, doing politics better. I want to send that message that we just need to be more civil in how we handle one another in conversation. And if we disagree, hey, agree to disagree. I like to think I'm more of an advocate of peace. There's so much chaos. You got politicians running around saying we need a revolution and we need a revolution. I think we need to be careful what we're asking for. Why not a renaissance, something fresh, something new? Keeping our kids. We got to mentor our young people better. That's one of my big frustrations too. We get to the 2 sides. I hear a lot the whole we need to resist. I like the word refrain. And as a leader, I think we need to learn to refrain. So everything keeping in mind that we're mentoring, and how are we mentoring our young people, to the positive or negative when it comes to politics.
So you think like the resist, that's a term commonly used against people who oppose Donald Trump, everything he stands for, just like there were people who opposed Barack Obama. But you think that's a little bit harsh, that refrain rather than resist?
I like refrain. If I'm going to be a leader, anybody can punch back. Anybody can kick back. I just always live my life. I don't have time to waste on all that. Let's find. One mayor I met with, he said we got more in common than what we have in uncommon. So let's focus on some of the strength and the areas that we can agree and move forward. And I stood out there at the fair this week 10 days straight. Over 10 hours, and I met every kind of political person you can imagine, to far right to far left, kind of in the medium where we're at, and I can have great conversation and be civil with people that are far left or far right. It's just, treating people where they're at. Not everybody's the same on their ideology. And so, but at the end of the day, I hold my values. I'm pro-life. That's a deep-rooted value in my life. And so, if I'm going to respect you, I ask you to respect me.
Well, it's time for our last commercial break for today, so we'll be back in just another moment. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. Our last segment for today. Bob Weeks here, co-host Karl Peter John, and our guest, independent candidate for governor Rick Kloos. So I'm going to ask a question that Karl feels pretty strongly about, but you talk about respect home rule, trust the city and county leaders to do the right thing and to adjust their own town's tax levies as necessary. I know Karl has been an advocate a long time for voter approval of all taxes, so that's two different standpoints.
Well,
there.
and I fought for it when I was a county commissioner,
right.
too.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Yeah, well, when we traveled the state, what I heard, we met with so many different city managers and mayors and city officials, and it came up a lot. Matter of fact, one particular mayor had been in long term. He said that he hadn't heard it brought up from a governor for quite some time, quite a few governors. And
this is the property tax lid that's been in effect for a couple
just
of
the
years.
home rule in general, respecting. What makes a state successful to me is all 105 counties. That's why I went to them all. And what makes that county successful is the local communities. And I think the communities know what's best for their situation. And so when we talk about the tax lid, and these individuals, they're voted in. And one guy in Emporia, he was saying, well, they know where we live anyhow. So if something doesn't quite go right, especially in rural Kansas, maybe in bigger areas, they're not quite sure who's all, city officials.
But as contrary view, all the states surrounding Kansas, except Nebraska, require voter approval before you raise taxes.
Yeah.
And that empowers. The Kansas Constitution has a provision that says all political power is inherent in the people. And in Kansas, that's a joke, even though it's in our Constitution. And people have petitioned to require voter approval for tax increases, because I'm one.
Right.
I was sued by the city of Wichita for circulating an illegal petition and learned that the First Amendment in Kansas only applies if it hasn't been superseded by municipal charter ordinance, which occurs under home rule. So there are definitely two opinions out there.
Yeah,
the question I'd have is if, as governor, the question has come up, should we have statewide voter approval for tax increases? The voters in Oklahoma had the opportunity to raise the sales tax in the 2016 presidential election. They had a statewide referendum on it. That's occurred in Missouri and Colorado too. Would you take the same position concerning state tax increases that you have for city, county, and local tax increases?
Yeah, well, and here again, I like the whole aspect of giving local community, the option and the power to make the right decision.
But we're talking about the state of Kansas here, not cities.
Yeah,
and
as far as
counties.
the state tax goes, as far as having a vote on the entire amount, is that what you're saying?
Well, for instance, they proposed in Oklahoma a 1 cent increase in the sales tax. The voters had a chance, they voted it down about 60-40 roughly, as I recall. That empowers voters and it drives voter turnout.
Yeah.
Some people say, no, we elected people. They're smarter. They have all the information. the average citizen, they shouldn't be making those decisions. If you're governor, and a proposal comes up for that, I mean, Kansas is one of the few states west of the Mississippi that does not have statewide initiative and referendum requirements in the law and Constitution, and I'm changing the grounds just a little bit. I don't mean to be unfair to you in doing that.
Right.
But the question would come up, should we have, say, a proposal? The court says we need to increase spending, and the legislature wants to raise the statewide property tax, which is 21.5 mils at the moment.
Right.
Should the voters be able to have a say at a referendum to vote on that, yes or no? I mean, and if you're governor, which direction would you want to lead the state? Yeah,
well, and that's definitely an area that I'm going to have to research more on, from that statewide perception. Anytime we're raising taxes, it's definitely going to cause people to get out and want to vote, and I think that people should have that option. So it's definitely an area that we're going to look into.
Sometimes not raising taxes gets them out to vote, like a few years ago. In the minute or so we have left, Karl, I know an important topic to you and to everybody is the expansion of Medicaid in Kansas. How do you feel about that?
Well, I look at things from a humanitarian point, like as far as our state budget as well. I run my nonprofit from the perspective of, because we've had a lot of different ones in the primaries saying that we're running for governor, that we need to run our state as a business. Well, a healthy balance of a business and a service, a nonprofit. If it's all service, then you don't have money to do the service. But if it's all business, then you forget about your people. And the economic drives in rural Kansas, just what I've been hearing, obviously is our hospitals, our nursing homes, education. We talked briefly about that. Those are economic drives. And so I look at it from a humanitarian aspect as well, that yes, again, it's going to cost us some money, but bringing it home into Kansas and looking at the fact that what are we going to do with these people, especially in rural Kansas, and you take our hospitals, our nursing homes away, they start drying up. So I think, looking at expanding Medicaid is something that is important. And the process of doing that, and I know not everybody's there, but we got to take a hard look at it.
Well, certainly our next governor is probably going to play a pivotal role in that decision, because after all, the legislature has passed that, but Governor Brownback vetoed that. So, guys, we are out of time for today. So, Karl, thanks very much. And independent candidate for Governor Rick Kloos, thank you very much for appearing on Wichita Liberty TV today. And thank you also to you, the viewer. And we'll see you again next week.